Good morning, everybody. Welcome to class this morning. Thank you for joining me, whether you are watching live or you are watching the recording. I appreciate you watching and taking the time to get involved in your education and learning some stuff and hopefully having a little bit of a good time doing it, I guess. We're going to be talking about disaster recovery this morning, and we are going to have probably a bit of a shorter live stream than usual this morning, but that's okay. There's not as much for me to talk about in this one. I more really want you all to see like the different articles and videos and stuff that are in the module that show you examples of when things didn't go right for people. Because some of the big things to notice out of those is just how big these organizations are that got involved in these social media quandaries, these social media situations here, where things went wrong. I mean, we have everything from, international corporations to governments to, all sorts of stuff there. So the big thing to get out of that is preparation and what we need to do to kind of come to this realization that, this might happen to us one day if we continue doing social media. It probably will happen to us because, there will be no live stream next week. right? Because next week is your spring break week. So I want you all to be able to kind of take the week off and enjoy some time there. We've had a long semester, right? It's taken us until now to get to spring break. So it'd be great to have a week where we could just kind of rest and recharge our batteries before the last 2 weeks of school, which are always the most challenging, right? Because they're the times when all the final projects are due, all the final exams are being done. They're the most stressful, most, time-intensive time of the semester there in those last couple of weeks. So it's nice to kind of just have the opportunity to recharge our batteries before we get into that. So take the week off next week. But in addition to that, we want to remind you that, the end of the semester is coming fast. It always is really challenging at this time of the semester. So, if you have any issues, if you have any questions, please let me know. While school won't be in session next week, I will be on campus for basically all week, right? The college is closed on Monday for Easter Monday, but other than that, I'll be here. So if you have questions, I'll be available. But, again, please, take the week off, right? You deserve it. Thanks for working hard, and thanks for, what you're going to do to finish strong. So, we're talking about social media disaster recovery today and what exactly that is. And, it's really when things go wrong. And when we use these terms and we talk about these things, one of the first things that, people think about is public relations, right? There's always some kind of PR, some kind of public relations situation where we're going to get the PR person out there and we're going to have them mitigate the damage. But one of the big things for us to kind of realize is that's not really the job of the PR person or public relations in general, right? That's something that might fall on them to be able to, get into this for disaster recovery. But public relations really is the practice of managing the spread of information between an entity, which is, you, a business, an organization, a government, whatever, and the public, right? So when we're talking about public relations in that sort of way, what we're really talking about here is something that is proactive, right? We're talking about an individual or really a concept, right? Because public relations, most of the time, public relations falls on a PR person, but public relations in general is a concept, and it's just the management of the spread of information between one thing and another thing, or one thing and the public, rather. So, whether it is personal, whether it's just, like in your projects where you're managing your own channels, you're your own PR person. And that's one of the reasons why, we see popular YouTubers who grow massive channels. They'll actually start to hire teams, right? And they'll have someone doing PR, and they'll have someone doing marketing, and someone doing editing and all this kind of stuff, because once you get to that level where everything's so big, you can't manage everything yourself anymore, right? And you might not have all the skills that you would need to have to really be successful in doing these things. And so, we've talked about certain good upfront public relations practices previously, right? Things like targeting your audience. A couple weeks ago, we looked at the idea of targeting your audience. And if we are managing the spread of information, then it's easier for us to manage the spread of information if we are managing the spread of information to individuals that we know who they are, right? We know who our audience is, so we can tailor that message and we can manage that information a lot easier. And the other thing is about branding, right? We create a centralized brand with a centralized brand message. And if we stay on the brand message and we don't stray too far from it, right, then the expectations have been set for what we're doing. And, it's, we're not going to deviate from the path, right? So it's really in that deviation when we start to see these sort of disaster situations or crisis situations arise where we end up with problems. Or it's when we are not managing the flow of information, right? When we just kind of lose complete control of the information that is out there regarding us or the brand or whatever. Right? So what we're seeing in public relations is really proactive. And if we're doing public relations properly, we will have fewer crisis situations on the back end. Right? And most of the duties of public relations have to do with building your reputation, right? You know who your audience is, you know what your message is, you're building that message, you're targeting that audience, and you are building the value of yourself, your brand, whomever on social media. Right, and this does extend into other areas. That's one of the things that we've kind of seen all semester long, yes, is the fact that we're talking about things within a framework of social media because that is one of the most common ways of communication these days. It has been for a decade or better now, right? The fact that, ever since kind of the ushering in of Web 2.0, we're looking at 2008 and to the current, right? Social media has kind of taken over the communication sphere, right? Like when we see some kind of PR crisis or some kind of issue, 99 times out of 100 these days it's something that kind of started on social media, whether it was Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or whatever, right? And it kind of branched off into other places. And a lot of people talk about the difference between the real world and social media, but in 2022 it's all the same thing. Right? Like people talk about the metaverse nowadays and how the metaverse will, put you into a virtual world, but we've kind of been straddling virtual reality for years now, right? Because the things that we do online, the things that we do on social media impact us in the real world. So we're beyond a time period, right, where we can kind of say, what happens online just happens online. Nobody reads that. Nobody worries about that anyway. It's not going to impact me. Right? And that gets back to this idea of building your reputation, right? Because your online reputation reflects your real world reputation. I mean, how many people have told you, to be careful about what you post on social media because it could influence someone who looks you up when you're job hunting? Right? So even when we're looking at on an individual level, we're controlling our narrative. We are, staying on brand message as to who we want to be seen as an individual. And we are putting that out there into the world so that if people see us, they get the right impression of us and our reputation. So this kind of thing isn't just important for businesses or organizations, governments, what have you, right? It's important to us on an individual level. So public relations is proactive. Damage control then becomes reactive. Right? If we're doing good public relations, we're out in front of things. We're trying to create an environment in which a crisis does not happen or the conditions for a crisis are minimal. Whereas damage control is about minimizing the negative perception of your brand caused by a crisis situation. Right? So we can look at public relations as before, damage control as after. So as we get started here, I think it is very critical that we take these two terms or these two phrases here of public relations and data damage control and make sure that we have them defined. But what exactly is a crisis, right? When we use this term crisis, and crisis is a big, intense word, right? What exactly is a crisis? And a crisis can be expected or unexpected in our terms. right? You know, we look at the graphic here. You know, a nice Photoshop of a house underwater here. Really well done by whoever created that. Wasn't me. But, you know, we have a flooded house here, right? And a crisis can be expected or unexpected. A colleague of mine just the other day came through, had to go home to turn the water off, right? Because one of their dogs jumped onto a water line, broke the water line, you know, the one that connects to the toilet, broke the water line, house is flooding. Unexpected. Right? But you could also leave a sink on. You know, if you're one of the wet bandits from Home Alone, right? You plug the sink, you turn the sink on, it starts to overflow and flood the house. That's expected, right? Because you created an environment in which that can happen. So a crisis can occur through expected or unexpected means. And it's typically going to be more unexpected if we're doing the best we can with public relations and staying on brand message and making sure we're targeting the right people up front. Right? Because then we're doing everything right and then just something comes out of left field and smacks us. It's more expected when we're not being proactive in situations, when we are giving up too much control of our brand message. Right, that's a lot of what you see in like the articles and the videos and things that are in the module there that I want you all to spend some time with. Right, giving up too much control of your brand message. You can almost expect these things will happen, right? Because we see, you know, a lot of people online are just agents of chaos, right? They just wanna see something go crazy and know that they had a hand in causing it. Right, that's what several of those articles are about in the module, is just basically a brand gave up too much control, made a promise they couldn't keep, and in doing so, you know, gave control to a group of bad actors and created for themselves a crisis situation. Right, so we could almost expect a crisis situation to occur in those sorts of instances. So what we want to do in that case is we want to have some forethought behind how certain actions might be perceived, and in doing so, that can prepare us for a potential crisis and, you know, allow us to get ahead of it, right? Because like when we think about some of those examples that are in the module of, say, things like the naming, like Bodie McBoatface, right? If you have something ridiculous like Bodie McBoatface in a poll, even as a joke, right? If you thought it was funny, there's a high chance that a lot of other people on the internet thought it was funny as well. And they vote for it. So you either need to be prepared to name your ship Bodie McBoatface, or you need to create an environment in which Bodie McBoatface does not get in the running. Pre-screen entries. Only approve ones that, you know, meet your brand guidelines so that you can and put those out. You know, if you prepare for a potential crisis, if you start out with good public relations and you think about what other people's actions could be, you can get out ahead of a potential crisis. And that's always, always, always preferable, right? So if we can expect a crisis, if we do things in a certain way, and in turn we don't do things that certain way, that's going to help us out a lot. But again, there are times where we just can't expect a crisis, right? A crisis is just completely caused by an unexpected event. And so in that way, it is important to have a plan where we can address our crisis. Now your question might be, well, how do we create that plan? Right? And that is the tough one. Because these plans are going to be highly individualized. Right? Because it's going to go back to who is your audience? What is your brand message? How can we kind of refocus back onto that? And there are some things that we can do and have it, as a part of a plan in general. But the specifics of our plan are going to vary from organization to organization, from individual to individual, so on and so forth. So how can we kind of avoid this? Right? Or what can we do as a part of our plan? So our first part of our plan, right, is going to be to try to avoid crisis. Do everything we can up front to try to avoid crisis. We can't always avoid crisis, but we can try to create an environment in which we can minimize the opportunity for a crisis to occur. So the first one is don't make promises you can't keep, right? That's what happened with Bodie McBoatface. They said, hey, whatever you want to name this boat, we're going to name that boat that. And then the people said, we want to name it Bodie McBoatface. In turn, causing the government to go, we cannot name the boat that. So they made a promise, and then they couldn't keep it. I would actually extend this to don't make promises. Right? Don't make promises. Because even the best of intentions, even making a promise with the best of intentions, sometimes something can fall through. Sometimes something can go awry and not happen, right? So I would extend this even further from don't make promises you can't keep to just don't make promises. People like to talk about weasel words. Like we could say, oh, well, Bodie McBoatface, like you vote for this name and it could be the name of a new ship. And that's kind of a weasel word, right? But it's also not a promise. So it's a little gray area there, right? Where people might not like that you're using these weasel words like could and might. But, speaking in generalities kind of helps insulate you, which is why people do that sort of thing, right? Keep the conversation focused. Narrow it down. Now, when we get into making a plan, and these bullet points here are kind of out of order, right? Because the next thing would be have a plan, right? So we want to keep the conversation focused. We want to keep it on brand. We don't want to stray or deviate from what our brand message is. And we want to have a plan. And part of that plan is to acknowledge the negative feedback. Maintain transparency. Right? That is a huge thing here because your social media followers, especially the ones that we have gotten all the way down the funnel, right? We got them to that loyalty point. Right? Think about the idea of loyalty in general, yeah? Loyalty goes both ways. I'm loyal to you, but I also expect you to be loyal to me. So if you make a mistake, I'm going to have expectations of you, and I'm going to see you in a better light. It's going to help build your reputation if you acknowledge the negative feedback, if you are completely open and transparent. If you did something worth apologizing for, if you apologize, and you do a good apology, right? Not one of these, kind of fake social media apologies that we see a lot. A lot of people like to make jokes about the Notes app, like, oh, we got a Notes app apology here. Because, since Twitter only, goes to 280 characters, People will take a screenshot of something they wrote in the Notes app and post it as an apology so they can shoehorn more words into an apology and put it on Twitter. And a lot of social media apologies seem disingenuous. And it's really hard to, kind of take people at face value just in general, right? But if we are, acknowledging negative feedback and we are open and honest, it's going to help. Now, the next big thing here is maintaining control of your emotions. And we got another slide that talks all about that, because this is where people get in the most trouble. Right? It's one thing to make a mistake and, do a little mea culpa and, lay low for a couple weeks and let everything kind of go away. It's totally another thing to lose control of your emotions and make things worse, which oftentimes happens, right? So when we're doing that, it's easy, since we are so invested, it's easy to lose ourselves in it. And it's easy to make comments and say things and do things that will make things worse, that will exasperate the situation. So we have to maintain control of our emotions. And so that's why one of the best things we could probably do in this sort of situation is hire someone else. Right, especially if you're a big brand that can afford it. Hiring someone to manage your social media crisis is going to be preferable. Right? There are entire businesses out there that revolve around just that. Social media crisis management. They come in, they assess the situation, they create a plan. They work to acknowledge the negative feedback and try to rebuild relationships. They are removed from the situation. They don't have a personal connection to the situation, so they can easily maintain control of their emotions. Right? So if it's really bad, or you definitely do not have the skills to rebuild after a crisis situation here, hiring someone else is the best option. Right? And so when you're making your plan, acknowledgement, transparency, and rebuilding. Rebuilding trust, rebuilding relationships. Right? Because we can almost think about, when a crisis situation happens, we can almost think about that funnel going in reverse and people kind of getting just spat up out the top of that funnel. Right? They lose that loyalty to you and they're going higher and higher, and maybe they don't want anything to do with you anymore. Maybe the extent of their engagement from that is just that they know you exist and they don't want anything to do with you anymore. And I think that is one thing that you have to be prepared for when it comes to crisis management as well, is the fact that you're not going to repair every relationship. You are going to lose a certain portion of your following. Some people might not care about what happened. Others might care deeply. It is highly dependent on what you did and how you handled it as to what you end up with there. And really at the core of that, when we talk about handling emotions and we talk about all of this kind of stuff, we can relate it all kind of back to the idea of conflict management. Right? Because one of those tips was control your emotions. And many social media blunders, or many things when, people make things on social media worse, it all happens from people who have not controlled their emotions well, who have done it poorly. right? And so conflict management and having good conflict management skills becomes incredibly important as a social media person, right? Just the conflict is not interpersonal. It's, if you're familiar with video games, it's PvE, it's player versus environment. The conflict is between you and the entire rest of the platform, or your followers, or whomever, right? And so we talk about how to handle conflict, and there's a whole chapter in your module that discusses conflict management, because it is in and of itself like a really, it sounds like a simple concept, but it actually, we're talking about interpersonal relationships, and we're talking about human to human communication and conflict and emotions, and it's heavy stuff, right? Conflict management is heavy stuff. And the first bullet point that I have here under how to handle conflict is the hardest thing in the world to do. Don't take it personally. And there might be times, right, in the social media sphere where it is very personal. Maybe you did something that was not good. I hear a lot of, I hear about a lot of more shady influencers nowadays that are, creating, phony cryptocurrency, NFT projects, pulling all their money out and just leaving all their fans who they kind of conned into buying this currency, holding the bag, and they get rich off of it, and then they just kind of disappear. Right? And you should take that personally. I'm not telling you to take everything personally. That should make you rethink who you are as a human being if you did that sort of thing and got the backlash from that. But just a general mistake, a general blunder that a lot of people make, that, maybe you said something and made some sort of gaffe that you didn't even realize you were saying at the time, or whatever, right? Don't take it personally. It's an opportunity to learn. It's an opportunity to grow in those situations, right? Being aware of things that you did wrong when you might not have known they were wrong is not a punishment. It's not a threat. It's an opportunity, right? So don't take it personally. Use it as an opportunity to learn. Ensure that there are very clear channels in which your community can engage, right? Don't close off engagement. Leave it open. You can't see feedback and respond to feedback and take in feedback if you shut everything down. Right? If you turn off all the comments, if you private your Twitter account, you create a barrier for engagement between your community and you. And in that case, you're just making things worse, right? Because not only did you do this thing, but now you're hiding from it. So you want to be able to ensure that there are very clear channels in which your community can engage. Ensure that feedback, opinions, and ideas are discussed, considered, and engaged with. Now, notice those three words there: feedback, opinions, and ideas. And we're talking about things that are in good faith here. We're talking about things that are constructive, right? Some people are just going to be filled with vitriol and hate, and they're just going to throw hate your way. And those are things that you can ignore. Those are things that don't need to be considered or engaged with, right? But feedback, opinions, and ideas that are given to you in good faith, you need to discuss them. You need to talk about them. Think about them and engage with them. And, maybe you can learn something about yourself there and add something to you as a human being, right? Because that's always going to be beneficial. And always ensure that you and or your staff members are publicly engaging, right? If you're going to do anything, do it out in the open. Don't DM people. Don't take it to private messages. Again, transparency, openness, right? Because this is something that impacts a community of people. It impacts more than just an individual, usually. And so having that conversation, if it's a more conversation of a more personal matter, you might want to have it with the individual, and then, you can both agree to just come out and say that, we talked about this in private. We came to this conclusion. We're okay now, or what have you, right? But just, that you're not trying to hide or obfuscate communication channels, making sure that you're publicly engaging as much as possible, and, really taking in the feedback that is constructive, that is something that can help you. Because in the end, right, like when you're dealing with a whole bunch of people and you want to move them down that funnel and you want to make them involved and engaged and loyal, the only way that you're going to do that is by having these open channels of communication and actually respecting the opinions and ideas and feedback that's made in good faith. If it's made in bad faith, you can ignore it. And if it's just vile hatred, you can just ignore it. But other than that, take it in. Use it as an opportunity for introspective. Or to be introspective, rather. And so that's all that I have for you today. About 30 minutes there, which is, a good time for this stuff. Again, most of what I want you to do is engage with the example media that I have in the module, the articles and the videos, Bodie McBoatface, Splashy Pants, all that kind of fun stuff that's in there. Read that, kind of see what happens, understand, what happens when you give up control of your brand, or what happens when, your messaging is a little bit off of what it should be. If you've diverted from the brand message, or, maybe if you take things a little bit too personally, right? And kind of take all of that in and use that to develop your own public relations and conflict management plan, right? Something that, or crisis management plan, something that happens, something that you can do to try to minimize crisis, and something that you can do when the unexpected crisis occurs. So again, thank you for watching. Again, no live stream next week. We'll turn the music on for just a couple minutes here, just in case anybody who's here with me live has any questions. And we'll see you next time.